Thank you for joining us this week on Ask a Historian. And each week we invite you to send in your questions, and we'll explore local history with you and hopefully have some fun doing it. Always look forward to the questions we receive and how we can investigate the story of this place through the things that might offer some curiosities and some wonderment. We have fascinating stories in the city of Mississauga, stories about this place that are unique to this place, and truly look forward to exploring them with you. So please send in your questions, and we look forward to chatting with you each week on the history of the city of Mississauga. Our first question this week on Ask a Historian is from Judy, asking about the story of Clark Memorial Hall. And so thank you for the question. And the building is a fascinating one. It's unique in the city of Mississauga. Architecturally speaking, it's built in the Spanish colonial revival style, again, unique in our city, and it is designated under the terms of the Ontario Heritage Act. It is now part of Old Port Credit Village Heritage Conservation District. But the story of the building itself connects to a fascinating element of our history. Mary Louise Clark, who had the building built in honor of her late husband, Alfred Russell Clark, in 1922. The hall commemorates his untimely demise. He was on his way to England in 1915 aboard the famous ocean liner Lusitania when it was sunk off the coast of Ireland in the early years of the First World War. Alfred Russell survived the sinking of the Lusitania. He was in the very cold Atlantic Ocean, was brought ashore, suffering complications of being exposed to the cold water. He ended up in a hospital in London, England, where he passed away as a result of pneumonia, never returning to Canada. And so several years after the fact, or after that point, Mary Louise Clark had the building, Clark Memorial Hall, built in his honor and donated to the Methodist Church in Port Credit to be used in perpetuity as a public facility or public hall. The Clarks themselves, they were wealthy Torontonians from Rosedale, and they had set up a summer home, a summer retreat, if you will, in what is now the Lorne Park Estates area of historic Mississauga, just down the road from Port Credit. And in the summer months when they were here in historic Mississauga, they attended First Methodist Church, later First United Church in Port Credit, and that's where the Clark Memorial Hall was donated. The church used the hall for public purposes, including at some point a variation of Sunday school classes and public spaces, an auditorium, a theater, and the like. In part due to the challenges of the Great Depression, the church relinquished control of the hall to the town of Port Credit in 1941. From 1941 to 1974, Clark Memorial Hall served as the municipal offices for the town of Port Credit. It also served as a community hall, a library, a jail, and it was the site of, again, Port Credit's municipal offices prior to amalgamation in the city of Mississauga. And again, it is rare as an architectural style within our city, and it connects to this moment in time that just at the early years of the First World War and the sinking of the Lusitania, and commemorates the loss of Alfred Russell Clark following the Lusitania sinking. And if you look above the center door, the main entrance to the building, in the cornice of the building, you will see the plaque that dedicates it to A.R. Clark and the Memorial Hall. So thank you for the question. Thank you, Andrew, for your question here on Ask a Historian, and it's one that tugs on my heartstrings a little bit. You're asking about the old junk shop, for lack of a better word, on Dundas Street in the village of Arundel, and the one that's now the vacuum store. And yes, indeed, the vacuum store has a long history, and one that actually connects to my personal family as well. So bear with me. This is a trip down memory lane a little bit. The building that we know as ONeills Vacuum Store was built in 1921, and it served as the Arundel General Store and Post Office for a period of time. It was built following the Great Arundel Fire of 1919, and that's another story we can go into in another episode of Ask a Historian. But following the Great Arundel Fire, when the Barker family lost their original home and general store, they rebuilt the general store a couple of years later, and this is the building that survives today. The square tower portion on the one side was actually added in 1938 to increase living space within the building, because the family not only operated the general store but also lived in the building itself as well. The general store in 1921 was operated by the Barker family. It later came into Thomas Barker and his wife, and it would later pass to his son Delmer. And Delmer and Marjorie Barker, which were my grandparents, ran the Barker General Store into the 1960s. Again, the general store, and first under John M. Barker and then under Thomas Barker and eventually his son Delmer, it maintained a tradition of long-running general stores in the Arundel Village community. The building itself that we know today was actually moved slightly in the 1950s. Dundas Street was widened. Where the building actually stood originally was in the middle of what would be the westbound lanes of Dundas Street. In the 1950s, it was moved back to its present location. Following Delmer's death in 1944, the general store was operated by his widow Marjorie Barker, née Adamson, into the mid-1960s. Kind of personal fact is my own mother was born in the building in 1940. The building remained, even after the general store closed, it remained in the Barker family. Ruth Barker operated a real estate office in the building, and then my Aunt Grace Barker operated what was known as the Missiniki Supposium, not symposium, but supposium, where everything was what you supposed it to be. It was essentially a antique store, or some refer to it as the junk store, but between the early 1970s and up until 1982, the building was home to the Missiniki Supposium. Interesting, the name Missiniki is a derivative of the indigenous word for the Credit River, which was Missiniki, meaning trusting creek or trusting water. But the Missiniki Supposium operated there until 1982, and I love the tagline that she created for it, where everything was what you supposed it to be. I remember it well when it was a symposium, or again, as locals refer to it often as the Arundel Junk Store. In the mid-1980s, the building sat empty and derelict and somewhat vandalized until it was acquired by the O'Neill family, who converted and renovated the building into the vacuum store, and a role that it continues to this day, albeit under different ownership today. And it's one of three former general stores in Arundel Village that survive today, albeit again with a variety of different purposes over time. But it connects, it's one of the lone surviving buildings on the original village core of Arundel, which stretched along Dundas Street, most of which was wiped out in 1919 and not rebuilt, with the exception of this building, operating again originally as the Arundel General Store and Post Office. So thanks for the question. Thank you, Marianne, for the question on the old brick farmhouse that's beside the Torley's company up on Derry Road. You were just curious about the story of the story of the house itself, and it is a fascinating heritage element, and hopefully looking at a bright future ahead of it. There are plans in the works to kind of see to some of its restoration and adaptive reuse, and we hope that they will come to fruition. The building itself was built probably around 1878. We know it as the Robinson Clark House. The land has a longer history. The land was patented first to John Reaper in 1822. Reaper sold the land in 1830 and changed hands several times until 1861 when Abel Robinson purchased part of the lot from Charles King. Charles King, after whom the community of Mount Charles, which was located nearby, was named. Abel then deeded the land to his son John in 1875. So John Robinson owns the property in 1875. John took out 2 mortgages on the property, one in 1877, one in 1878. They were both paid off by 1880. And we believe that those mortgages represent the improvements that would take place on the property, namely the building of a house and probably outbuildings like a barn and the like. The farmhouse, the building of it, is attributed to John Robinson, the son of Abel Robinson. And this is a different Robinson line that appears elsewhere in the city, including the builder of our offices at the Grange, who was known as John Beverly Robinson, but a different family altogether. The house is shown on the 1877 Historical Atlas of Peel County, and it remained in the Robinson family between up until 1908. In 1908, it was sold to the Wedgwood family. They had roots nearby in the community of Derry West, and Alfred Wedgwood owned the property from 1908 to 1920. And in 1920, it was sold to Fred Clark, who would be the longest and last owner of the property as an agricultural property. Fred Clark owned the property from 1920 to 1961, when the property was sold for development purposes. The house is designated under the terms of the Interior Heritage Act, and it is a fascinating story of at the time, a well-preserved Victorian-esque farmhouse, farmhouse with some Gothic revival elements of it. It's lost some of its ornamentation over time, and of course it has sat unused for quite some time, but we're looking forward to hopefully a bright future for this property, and wishing those who own it all the very best in the plans that they have, and hopefully they will come to fruition. It is one of the last remaining structures from the historic Lost Village community of Mount Charles, so it has a connection to those early formative years of what is now the city of Mississauga. And again, hopefully it has a brighter future in front of it. So thank you, Marianne, for the question. Thank you, Barbara, for your question on the Brickyard Eagle that appears on Clay Hill Road near the small parquet. And the Brickyard Eagle, it's located, the parquet that surrounds it, and the splash pad. There's a few interpretive plaques on the property. They all commemorate the former Cooksville Brickyard. And the Cooksville Brickyard is one that has great stories in our history, and kind of ties to the evolution of our city. But specific to your question about the Brickyard Eagle, the Brickyard Eagle once adorned or was in close proximity to the head office of the Cooksville Brickyard. And when the plant closed down in the 1990s, some things were salvaged to be repurposed, and one of the things that was saved was this carved brick eagle. It is a piece of art, if you will. It was made by a worker from the Cooksville Brickyard who became very skilled in not only his craft as an artist, but also working with brick as a medium. His name was Angelo Belluz, and the sculpture was created sometime between 1950 and 1957. Not entirely sure as when it was actually created. Even in an oral history we had with Mr. Belluz in 1999, the exact date of creation was not known with certainty. But he had worked for some time at the Cooksville Prairie Brickyard, and his subsequent interests and development of artwork involving clay and brick sculpture can be seen in other things, like the sculpture for the Streetsville Bread and Honey Festival at the entrance to Streetsville Memorial Park near the Credit River, just off of Church Street. Same artist involved with creating that piece of artwork in the entrance to the park, as has created the Brickyard Eagle on Clay Hill Road. And it's a fascinating element of public art that really ties to our history as well. Again, the eagle featured at the Cooksville Brickyard, made from the brick that was harvested locally, made by an artist with Italian origins. Great many Italian workers worked at the Cooksville Brickyard, and really ties to kind of that early artistic expression of an artist here in our community, and how they use the medium at hand and their expertise in working with a particular material, largely born out of the working at the Brickyard itself, to create a memorial, if you will, or a lasting remembrance of the activities of the Cooksville Brickyard in an artistic piece that was built many years ago. Again, salvaged, restored, and replaced a few years back now, with a commemoration that involved many former workers at the Cooksville Brickyard. And again, I highly recommend going seeing it. The work of Angelo Bellew's a really strong symbol to the connecting to the history and the culture of historic Mississauga, particularly around the former Cooksville Brickyard.